Hey there, welcome to Why We Roll, a tabletop role-playing game design podcast.
We're your hosts, Chris Pickett, creator of the historical fantasy game Dance Macabre, and Wythe Marshall, creator of the political sci-fi game Stillfleet.
Throughout the show, Chris and Wythe hope to amplify new creative voices. We'll chat with different TTRPG designers, focusing on the world of indie games.
We take a curious approach to game design, working through a range of mechanical and narrative questions that are pertinent to many designers, players, and GMs.
We hope to showcase fresh and even challenging ideas about what makes imagination-based games just so powerful.
Okay, let's find out why we roll.
Hey, we're live. It says we're live. What's up, Vex? So today this is special, quick, not necessarily quicker, but kind of random time. It's not a Monday night here in New York, but a Friday earlier in the evening time slot to talk to our friend Vex, who's a really awesome game designer, and I've been lucky to play a bunch of games with over the last couple years. And yeah, just been trying to for a while get Vex on the show and talk about their work. And I think we might have to have Vex back on when Chris can join. Chris is, I believe, working, so this is probably going to be a solo Wythe joint. And if you're listening to the podcast, we're taping June 7th. But yeah, I'm really excited, Vex, to be able to chat about some of your games. I haven't been able to play all of them yet, but I've played several of them, and they're super fun. So thanks for making time.
In time.
Yeah. Yeah, one day we'll schedule like every single weird playtest either of us can think of and just have some sort of mega like online con that just lasts like a weekend.
To say you've played all my games, you'll have to play all of the weird old ones that I've unpublished, which a lot of them are from weird game jams or jokes from Twitter. There's strange stuff in there is what I'm saying.
I guess I could also just aim for just the ones that are published on hexavexagon.itch.io, which is your itch page.
You could do that.
And that would still be a lot. You have a bunch of GMless games, solo games, and then the bigger games, bigger might not be the right word, but Ashfall and Hunting Billionaires for Sport, I'm a big fan of. And I know
they
Signal
are literally bigger because most of my games are like 1 or 2 pages.
Right, and those are like bookish games. And Signal, the epistolary game, writing letters back and forth, that actually was an engine behind some Stillfleet games. So it was fun to see how your games like fed into, I guess, like a campaign that Ryan, our mutual friend, is working on for Stillfleet. So that was like a fun, crossover
he's been
event.
telling me about the campaign recently.
Yeah, we did a
free now, so we've been co-working.
Nice. Yeah, I wanna catch up with him. Maybe we should all just get on the show in the fall, and talk about that as well.
We should get the party animals on the show.
We really should. Yeah, just talk about like campaigns and like that nowadays. Like not just campaigns among. I don't know how old anyone is, but I turned 40 this year, and it's like harder and harder to keep things going, and people always complain about that. Scheduling is the ultimate final boss in RPGs, but also we're all on different continents and time zones, and it's wild. Different jobs.
Yeah, you wouldn't believe it, but it's harder for me to get my friends together. Like, everyone's schedule is so ridiculously different that for some reason making friends with people across the world and working on different time zones works better for me.
Yeah, I mean, to some degree, same. Like my friends from college, a lot of them have kids or have moved away, and so it's actually kind of easier to just have people online who randomly like are free when I'm free. But it's been really pleasurable to like have a group that's so diverse temporally, geographically. So it'd be a cool episode to talk about. Well, before we, I guess, get too deep, for folks who don't know you, haven't had the pleasure, Vex, can you kind of introduce yourself? What brings you to indie TTRPG design?
Oh, that's actually a really good question because I don't know the answer to that. I don't know how I got
enough.
I'm Vex.
Maybe what did you start playing?
I make games on itch. I've made, well, like Wythe has said, I'm kind of like across the board, which is what I do when I do hobbies. I'm always like trying to perfect things, but not like one specific thing, all the different things at once. Um, and you can find that on my itch page. Um, and how did I get into games? Ooh, I don't know. I guess I've always been interested in game design. I did do one of MIT's game design courses. They have free online courses. I do actually recommend them. Um, I think the thing is called edX, or that might have been a different universities. Um, but yeah, they're cool courses. Unfortunately, I think only one of their game design courses is not like very video game centric, which is just how education is at the moment. Um, all the courses about just games have pretty much gone. Um,
Yeah, I've found just a quick interjection. Some video game design courses are pretty like one to one with tabletop,
oh
and
yeah, some
others
of
are
them are
like
definitely good.
wildly. Yeah, it sort of
I
varies whether
think
it's about graphic design or like storytelling.
I think those are like specifically the ones from professors who were recently teaching just game design and who have been like moved over into this has to be about video games because otherwise people won't sign up.
Right, right. That makes it. There's pressure economically to make it more appealing.
Yeah,
So when
yeah.
did you take those courses? Out of curiosity, like, is this or is it an ongoing educational thing?
That was fairly recently. It was before well, not that recent now, but what is time? Um, I want to say like 2014 or something. It was before I moved to making games on Canva, which shout out to Canva. Canva's amazing and it's underrated as well. If it will, we'll add a link to Canva in the show notes because
Sure.
this is a show about game design and people should know about Canva as an option for doing publishing stuff. So even today, some people that I know who don't make games or anything were posting in their Discord about how Affinity's 50% off today. And it's like, you don't have to pay for Affinity. Like, it's better than paying for Adobe products, but you can just use Canva for free.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good note that like the tools we use, we can be open about discussing and sharing. And we often complain about the Adobe suite, but our team, I mean, we have it basically due to day jobs anyway. But if
Yeah.
not, yeah, Canva seems pretty great from the little I've played around with it. So I think it's interesting to sort of see how other people like go from conceiving of books to literally putting them together and then distributing them. Um,
Yeah, it's definitely like lacking in some ways, but it also the thing about Canva is I find it simplifies a lot of stuff that you don't want to be thinking about a lot of the time. And that's great. That's great for me who doesn't like thinking.
or perhaps like you do like thinking about game design, but not so much graphic design or all of the things. Like I don't know. I'm just
Yeah.
throwing out there. I think you have some beautiful graphic design actually. Like Hunting Billionaires, I think specifically jumps out as very well designed.
Yeah, but the thing about
Um,
that is like I do work very hard on that and I don't want to do hard work.
right.
Layout is the one thing that I'm most inclined to hire someone to do. I actually, I have talked to Tim Deney about possibly getting him to do layout for Hunting Billionaires for Sport when the update is ready for that, because I don't want to do it.
Well, I'll say publicly, we would be really interested of all the games that are out there of cool indie games in supporting some version of that. And again, I don't mind doing layout. I actually think layout's the most fun thing other than writing. I've come to believe about RPG design, but maybe I'm just a bit of a masochist or something because it is
That's
also
interesting,
extremely
and
tedious.
I feel like that kind of makes sense with your love of tables. Somehow that
Yes,
just
yeah.
mashes together well.
Yeah, there's a lot of like going back and being like, no, that's not quite right. It's a maximalist. There's like a lot of things you can do with layout, but it is also it's a real uphill battle. And learning it kind of later in life, like I am really just a writer at the end of the day, so getting really involved in layout to support like a hobby business is like infinite amount of time. There's never going to be enough time to actually be good at it, but I've become more comfortable. So like the basic stuff is like, okay, that actually doesn't take that long. But yeah, if you can work with like an actual cool type designer, that's a great opportunity. So backing up, so you said 2014, you're taking some classes. When did you start playing games? I'm always curious. I know for different people, it's like different, eras of their life, but were you playing RPGs as a kid?
I definitely played some RPGs as a kid. It's one of those cases where like you get together with your friends and no one knows what they're doing, which is unfortunate because like if I had a cool older brother, which like I have an older brother, but he's decidedly not cool, so let's not talk about that. Um, you know, if there was someone who was older and knew how to play games, who could like run games for us, then maybe things would have been different. I may have been an even better game designer. Who knows? But yeah, definitely. Uh, when I was just starting high school, I was playing games. So that's quite a while back. But trying to think what like was the first game where I knew what I was doing. Um, damn, I've not actually played that many games where I know what I'm doing.
Did you play the Dragon game, Dungeons and Dragons, as a
I
kid?
have played Dragon
Not a trick
Game
question.
enough times to hate it, which is I think 3 times. um, not good experiences at all.
But you liked the form of the RPG, so that's interesting. So that's much faster. I feel like I played a lot of D&D until I got to the point of like, yeah, there's like other games that are the same but better. Um,
Right. I don't think I played Dragon Game until after I was on Twitter, like learning about RPGs from RPGC, which was super active on Twitter, and they've got tons of amazing indie designers. So like by that point I already knew what terrible games look like.
yeah, yeah. So you sort of came into it with a sense of the diversity of experiences in RPGs, that it's not just sort of the Dragon game or clones of that.
Yeah, and I'm
Um,
really grateful for that because I would hate it if I wasted my time with games, and also if I was like in that. I know tons of people who come from the old school, and they've definitely like they've learned things a different way and they've got a different perspective, and a lot of them don't like. It's not that like they're bad at games because of that. A lot of them are really good designers despite that, or maybe because of that, but like in a different way from you'd expect or something. I don't know how to explain it.
I feel you. I think I'm a big fan of Monty Cook's writing, and I read a lot of his books as a kid. Even though in retrospect, like I don't play a lot of the games. I certainly don't play a lot of like D&D set in the city of Tolus or whatever. But I think to some degree, and I think of this about a lot. There's a certain generation like John Wick. There's like a lot of writers who like I still enjoy reading their books, and I think even when they're writing for D&D or whatever, or now with Monty Cook the Cipher system, it's like it's not about the system as much as the perspective on different kinds of stories and different sorts of plots. And there's different ways to enjoy that and take away something as a designer, even if you've kind of moved on from like I'm probably not going to play this game as written. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
it's
some
like
of the
comics.
older school guys know. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
I I think like several of my I don't really read American visual novels very much. Visual novels? Graphic novels is the term. Um, but I do have like a couple of favorite writers, and I know for a fact that they do like one hobby project and then one project for like Vertigo, Dark Horse, or whoever, basically a group that is owned by Marvel or DC. It doesn't matter. But like they're making that money and then they're doing the cool stuff that I enjoy. But people are always like, "Oh, hey, you should check out this fucking franchise property that you don't care about." And I'm like, I don't want to, but also I know that this writer has actually done a thing on there, and if I read that one particular thing, I would probably love it. So
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I feel like I'm this way. Like, I'm pretty picky about media, but not out of like, especially as I get older, it's less like there's rights and wrongs, and it's more like I don't have a lot of time, and I'm sure I would
Oh
actually
yeah,
get into it, and it's more
we
just
should
like
talk about that,
yeah, like it's like
the
I don't,
rights and
it's just
wrongs thing.
the rights and yeah. I mean, what do you think? Are there rights and wrongs when it comes to speculative fiction?
Um, the thing that's interesting about that is actually, now that I think about it, it's the same way I think about games in terms of like quality, the same way I think about political parties, because political parties, like a lot of them are just straight up fascists, right? But the reason people vote for them isn't usually because those people are fascists. It's usually because they buy into the lifestyle ideals that that party is selling, and those ideals are usually like good things. Like nationalists are like, hey, you know what, it would be really great if we like made our country stronger and more independent, and it's like that's objectively a good thing, even if voting for a nationalist party is objectively a bad thing. And games are the same way in the sense that like a system can be like not actually a good game, but the reason people like the system is usually a good reason despite that. Like Dungeons and Dragons is the perfect example of that, because it's not a game that's popular because it's good. And it's, despite what people say, it's not a game that's popular because of word of mouth. It's certainly not a game that's popular because of how the company that owns it manages their products. Um, but the reason people like it is because it's extremely easy to play a bunch of fantasy tropes, and that's a thing that like everyone can just pick up. And that's like, I hate Dragon Game probably more than most people, most like indie designers who are like, this is ruining my life just by existing. And I still think that's a fantastic thing, that you can just pick up and play a bunch of tropes, um, if that's like the thing that you want to do.
Right, but I mean, those tropes are in lots of other games. So I would say it's probably historically that they were out first and marketed well and a lot that has made it the default, as opposed to anything inherent. Like, you could imagine another world where either a different game with a lot of the same fantasy tropes became bigger, faster at some point, or other tropes became more popular culturally for whatever reason. And there's something about
I
just
mean, that
the
that is just a
persistence
thing
over
in other
decades of
countries.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And right, you do see this like with in apparently in Japan with TTRPGs, where it's not sort of the same tropes, right? So that's it's going to be different games that are popular. But yeah, I
Japan's a
completely agree.
really
I mean,
interesting case for that.
yeah, I don't
Because
know that
in
much about it because a lot's not translated, right? You you know more, you know a good bit about sort of Japanese culture, I take it.
a little bit.
Yeah.
So the thing that I brought up with you some other time about how Isekai has like a different language from Dungeons and Dragons is something that I think about a lot in terms of Japan, because in Japan the Isekai genre came from replays, which is um, stories that people have written based on their campaigns. And it's clear that all of these campaigns were Dungeons and Dragons campaigns. But at some point, the the major RPG in Japan became Call of Cthulhu, I think. And I don't know when that point happened. It's clearly like a disconnect from where all these replays came from.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and also why a modern horror game, why the Lovecraftian tradition. I mean, my favorite things are sort of at the intersection of this, and to a degree, like Neon Genesis Evangelion. So it's about politics, it's Lovecraftian, it's about Buddhism, and there's this sort of spiritual dimension, and at the same time, it's not any of those things. It's not very typical Lovecraftian story. Um, and it's sort of Japanese, but it's also weirdly, I mean, like many anime, but it sort of has this pretense of being global and sort of about America and the sort of hegemon. Um, but yeah, I don't know enough, and there's probably other people, historians of the the hobby we could have on to talk about like why different things take off in different ways. But I do think it's telling that, yeah, you have the D&D world, and then you have these other sort of patched over big worlds, including Call of Cthulhu and many other games. I even forget how big like Warhammer is. And it's really big. I mean, there's tons of people who are still into it, not ironically. And to your point, I mean, again,
they
beyond good
release
and
new
bad, like there's
games like
something
every
they're
2
into.
years.
They release a lot of product. They put out a lot of product, a lot of novels.
And they're like almost always bad games, and people still buy them. I mean, the video games.
Oh yeah, there's
a
a lot of video games, a lot of
people
tabletop
still
games, a
buy
lot
the
of war
tabletop,
games.
and that's
Yeah,
just the most expensive thing. And
yeah,
also, they keep changing it for some reason.
yeah. I mean, it is marketing to some degree, but to your point, I think it's hitting on sort of universally fun styles of gaming, and they've made it good enough. You know, it's and I think it gotten a huge lead in terms of marketing. Where like, yeah, they're going to be people who want to play that. Back here in indie world, can I ask to switch topic a little? How did you get involved in game design? So like, was there a moment, or was it just always like when were you like, no, I write, like I make the games now, like we're gonna play my game? And what was the first game? I don't know. Like I look at your stuff on itch, but I have no sense of like. I guess I could look at the devlogs, the
Yeah,
release
because
dates.
the early stuff's not on itch anymore. I unpublished everything that I made in Google Docs is why. I was like, now that I'm working on Canva, I can't leave this stuff up here.
Right. So it was more about the sort of graphic design or feeling of like, does it look, like a product, like something that's more appealing? Not necessarily the gameplay itself, but you had this
I
earlier
mean,
era
some of
and
it's
now the
also
current
work I
itch era.
don't like.
Sure.
You get that whole artist thing where you're like, I've done better, so I can just get rid of this now.
Yeah. Like I don't even want to talk about that. That was the past. Yeah. Well, so I don't know. Yeah. Where did you start, or where did you start? Maybe the modern era, if that's a better way to phrase it.
Yeah. Oh, well, there was definitely a modern era thing in which that came from me being involved in stuff on Twitter. I think like the turning point was everyone moved over from, was it called Google Plus? That was apparently where the indie game design was previously before Twitter. And then they moved over to Twitter when that shut down. And that was about the time that I was finding indie game designers on Twitter. So I think I just saw some game jams and decided to join them at that point. Oh, that was also when I was getting really into AP podcasts, which, yeah, once you get into AP podcasts, you're like, I should make a game.
What AP were there any APs that jump out, or is it so many? You know what I mean? Like, was there a specific inspiration or moment of like, this is what I want to do?
That's a good question. I don't think there was one that specifically made me want to design games. There were definitely some that stood out as fantastic APs, like Lakeshore and Limbo, which was uh, on a system called Freeform Universal, which is just like roll a d6. Great system.
Just make shit up, yeah.
I loved the Song Fial season of Friends at the Table. I don't actually like anything else Friends at the Table does. Um, I guess it's too talky for me or something, which is probably something you shouldn't be able to say about a podcast, but I can say it, so don't worry.
You said it.
Shit, what else was there? There was this really good one called Scene Play, and it was just like one guy talking to a bunch of indie designers, which, that's a lot of podcasts, but this guy like had no following at all. And he's like a really good composer. He would compose piano pieces and poems for all of his episodes. So I think every episode had a different piano piece and poem in it. It was cool as hell.
That's lovely. Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting how many APs I've heard, because in my head a lot of them mash together and are kind of like, oh, it's D&D, whatever, it's just recorded. But there is this diversity, and I know you've pressed me on this, and I think some other folks have as well. Richard Cross on our server, but there's all these different APs that are like innovative and build mechanics into like the very fabric of like how they do the recording. And recently I was lucky enough to do, we Chris and I went and recorded an episode of Twice World Tales in Washington Heights with our friends there, and that was interesting to see how they taken into account a lot of like literally the space you're in and the dice you're rolling and the pieces of paper you have, and like it wasn't just do whatever you want and we'll put a mic in front of you. It was like we're gonna be like in a way acting for 2 hours and take it seriously, and I think there's like a huge range. But as someone who's so used to just writing, it's like a very different and GMing with friends, right? But it's a very different way to do it. This kind of professional, like what of this conversation is fun for other people to hear and what of it is maybe not as fun. And
Yeah,
I imagine that informs game design is why I bring it up. Like you might have a different idea about game design, listening more than reading, or maybe that's a question.
to speak to that, the best example of that, if you want to see an actual play with extremely high production value, there's a thing called Colic 1991, and that is the guy who GMs and produces the show. Is the guy who used to produce Critical Role very early. No, he wasn't producer. He was community manager, I think. But yeah, he left that or was kicked out. I don't really know the deal there. And he went and did his own show on Twitch/various streaming platforms, trying to get whatever's best for the budget. Because this guy, man, he spared no expense on that show. And yeah, it's crazy the amount of special effects and projections and stuff they have on that shot. Like, you've seen Critical Role, you know what their set design is like there. This is more than that. And your question about whether or not that informs how you design games. Yeah, definitely does. Because I very specifically remember that I have this thing when I start designing games. I always make a document that I call design directives, and that's just what I want the game to be by the end of the process. And a lot of my design directive documents specifically say that, like, various things about, basically, I want it to be a game that's easy to play on an actual play podcast.
Right. I mean, I know what you mean. It's funny to mention that because I actually don't listen to any of these shows. I have heard the Sangfiel Friends of the Table a bit. I didn't finish it. I have heard Kolak a little bit. I hadn't finished it. I probably will because that is pretty epic, as you say. And a lot of the smaller ones I would probably listen to an episode of and be interested in, but like again, just time wise, wouldn't like commit to. The big ones I don't listen to at all, other than now Worlds Beyond Number. But that's more an artifact of like, okay, now I know the people, so it's less like about the show, if that makes sense. But I feel like it's just back to what I was saying. It's like I don't know. I don't think about podcasts when I'm writing. You know what I mean? And I do the design directive thing. I think that's really smart, and maybe that's something to talk about in terms of how the process. So I'd like to get into your games. So to jump around a little, what are your games, and what maybe we can pick one to focus on to start off. And so if people aren't familiar, they know some of your process. But I love the design directive piece, and that's something I actually have started doing more recently. So even for like a post or just a rule set or like an encounter is like, okay, what is the purpose of this? Can I bullet pointed like 3 bullets? And I think that's great to say like it is meant to be for an actual play, or maybe it's meant to be a solo journaling experience or whatever, right? Like have that start at the top, like what is the audience experience, and work backward from there. Because I think a lot of times in my head, maybe naively, and I like your thoughts on this with your games, like I'd start with genre, like this is a fantasy game or this is a sci-fi game, but I don't think that's actually as interesting as like what is the experience of the user. And I think it leads to different cross genre. Like, again, I think about Ashfall as a game that isn't really comfortably in a single genre, and it's more about a mood or like a way of connecting with people, which is fun that you've created.
It's very specifically not in a single genre.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you literally can't play the game in the single genre.
I mean, the one when we played through most of it, it was mostly modern, but I take it that it had a lot of eerie Lynchian elements, and I feel like it could have tipped over. It felt like, kind of on the edge of sci-fi the whole time. But maybe that's a good place to start. So could you kind of introduce the game Ashfall? I know it may still be in flux in your mind. I'm not actually sure. I'd love an update myself. But that was a fun one.
Oh yeah, that I've been trying to make my work ready for print. Ashfall is one of them that I've already done, and part of that was I have made a few adjustments. The main thing is that it's no longer a GM-less game because that was causing too much work and too much conflict. So I just axed that, and that was a thing on the design document. So it takes a lot for me to get to the point in a game where I'm like, I have to not do one of the things the game is designed to do. But sometimes that's very distinctly the right decision. So you just have to. But yeah, Ashfall. So it's a game where it's basically designed to share the like organizational load so that it's not one person doing all of that. And part of that is instead of having a character sheet, it is a system that has playbooks like Powered by the Apocalypse systems. But it doesn't use a system that's anywhere near Powered by the Apocalypse at all. Instead, the playbooks are based on genres. So what you get when you get all your friends together and you decide what playbooks you're using is you have a narrative that is going to incorporate a bunch of different genres at the same time. And the way it works, basically the main mechanic for that is you only roll dice when one of the main characters does a certain action, and the actions that determine when you roll the dice are on each of the playbooks. And those actions are very specifically the moments in time that genre really focuses on, and that's how it manages to like bring all that together.
Right. And it also, at least like and again, I know there've been different versions and different evolutions, but the players took on really interesting roles, and it led toward everyone contributing to kind of the narrative. I don't know how much of that is retained in a version with the GM, but I liked that idea that people were responsible for different aspects of the environment. So it wasn't just a character, or rather their character could also bring on these big like narrative changes. And it felt, I'd say even more than Powered by the Apocalypse, a game about kind of right at the intersection of like world building and like inhabiting a single, personality, as in,
Yeah,
traditional Dragon game, which was
I
an
think
interesting,
most of
like,
that's retained.
yeah, cool.
Because a lot of that is built into the Doom clocks as well. So each of the playbooks also has a Doom clock in which basically those are the narrative beats of the genre. So when you have to roll, you get 2 dice and you decide which one of them is for success or failure and which one of them is for safety or fate. And if you roll poorly on the safety or fate dice, then the next like thing in your genre, your playbook's doom clock happens. And those things are always like things that you, the player, have prepared before that session. So you only have to prepare one of them because you'll never tick 2 in a session. But it means that the GM's not coming to the table with a whole plot that they have to make sure you stay inside of, because all of the players have pieces of plot that they're going to bring, and you don't know which ones are going to trigger when. And so that helps like retain that collaborative world building aspect of the game.
Yeah, I like that, and also I liked that it felt, which I think you can achieve. I feel like I've even done this like back in the day, GMing many games of like Dungeons and Dragons, and then sort of OSR versions thereof, the sci-fi versions. But you can have games where you legitimately don't have a big plot, but you also aren't just doing hex crawls and fighting monsters, which I find worse than having a big plot, and both of those are kind of more boring than something more built around, narrative discovery and personal change. But I think you can come in with these kind of tilts or like progressions in mind, and then, as you say, like a couple of them are activated per session. But the game of Ashfall we played, where there was that sort of distributed GMing, it was building towards something. Perhaps it was doing it in a very David Lynchian, like surreal mode because of the no one was in charge. But it was still really satisfying, and it was fun to see how the group think. It wasn't like people were conflictual about things like shutting each other down, but it also wasn't just a yes and improv that sort of had a happy medium all the time. Like it had real sense of like foreboding from the wildness of someone playing environmental threat and someone else playing kind of narrative threat, like the antagonist. And in addition, we each had our sort of PCs, our characters, so there was sort of this weird duality for yourself, but also like this really asymmetric way of kind of dividing up how these games have different kinds of tensions built in TTRPGs. And that actually has definitely influenced me in terms of my game design and Stillfleet, and thinking about, everything from like powers, but also just like what's a good plot, to like, okay, maybe there are different kinds of clocks, and these, not just in my head as a GM, but like I can spell these out as a game designer and try to have different clocks of different kinds that aren't necessarily symmetric. They're not monster fights. They're not pitched battles or something, or pitched roll-offs to like, figure out a puzzle. But it's more about different kinds of clocks and foreboding. And I know, I feel like maybe some of that is, well, I should ask you, have you been inspired by like Blades in the Dark, which I discovered like kind of after Stillfleet, but it's definitely, again, been an influence in that sense.
No, but that all of that comes very directly from the source material, which is to say, Ashfall is a game specifically inspired by the Life is Strange series, particularly
right.
the second game, which is a prelude to the first game. So that's Life is Strange Before the Storm. That game is made by a different studio. There's two different studios that make the series. And that game, and also I think the most recent one that came out, are made by the same studio, and then the other two are made by a different studio. But yeah, I think that game was like heavily, that studio's, they had a lot of involvement from Ashley Birch, the voice actress who plays one of the characters. And because she loves that character so much, she like put a lot of thought into like what the inner world of all the characters who were part of the original story is, and that's why the second game is a prequel to the first game. And it's also why the second game is like very mysterious and deeply emotional. And that's basically what I was trying to capture when I made Ashfall. And that's also the reason why Ashfall is like so heavily about sharing music with your friends, because that game has incredible music in it. And like it knows that the people who play this game will, when given the opportunity, have their character just sit on a bench for 5 minutes to listen to the entirety of a song. Like there are parts where you can just sit down and the narrative will not progress until you do something else, and the only thing you can do is like stand up and start talking again. And there's like, a quick time event / slow time event where you have to press E to do that, and you can just sit there and not press E and enjoy the music on a train ride or whatever.
Thanks so much for listening to Why We Roll. If you like what you hear, you can support us at patreon.com/Stillfleet. patrons get access to all kinds of extra material for all of our games, starting with Stillfleet, but now including Blister Critters, of course Dance Macabre, The Sometimes Kingdom, and hey, we're always working on new stuff. So check us out at patreon.com/Stillfleet. Yeah, I mean, I think that was also something that's taken with in terms of your game design was like the intentionality. Like when we actually were playing Ashfall, because one thing to discuss it or read it, but then when you the music sharing piece felt not again, it was like an interesting ecotone or like hinge, knife's edge. Like it wasn't diegetic purely, and it didn't really make sense always to be diegetic, but it also didn't feel just like a friends sharing music thing because it
It's
felt
so
like
close to diegetic.
right, you had to lean in, and thus it felt actually more like we were collaboratively imagining the actual play or movie version, or however you want to think about it, like cinematic scene in a video game, whatever. But we're imagining like a dramatization of a story as we're telling the story. So that's what I mean about there's interesting things with your game design where there's this duality where there's traditional RPG elements. Like I was playing like a Midwestern mom type who was kind of her life had gone to shit, sort of like the woman in Nomad, like sort of an older woman who's like on her own, kind of reinventing herself in Canada in this small town, who befriends a bunch of teens who are like Scooby-Doo teens solving a mystery. So I was both like the one adult, but also like the goofy one who like wasn't as invested. So it was like a,
I'm glad
weird
you brought that
character.
character to the game too.
I was super fun. It's honestly one of the most fun. That's why it's so vivid in my mind. But it felt like on the one hand, I was like busy trying to be that character, but I also had a story role in terms of this distributed GM function. But then things like the music aren't really either of those, right? And it's not, as you say, it's not really diegetic, but it feels close to when you put on a certain song, like, oh, this will be really good for this scene. I kind of know why, but I also kind of don't know what'll happen when I play it and how obviously the sort of improv of the scene's going to play out. So it was interesting to have these different things going on, and none of it ever felt like a burden. It felt like light enough. It might just be the group of friends, but I thought that was a fun way to kind of divvy up different aspects of running a game, as opposed to, again, I'm so in my own head about like the ye old traditional, there's like a screen and it's like, okay, you've gotten a job, and everything for me breaks down into noir. It's like there's a job, but there's more than just the job. But I think Ashfall was a nice reminder of like there's so many other narrative structures, and there's these weird emergent postmodern, kind of like you impose them from at the top narrative structures that work really really well and you can playtest through, but that aren't related to a quest. You know what I mean? And in fact, in the initial version, at least, it was related, as I recall, to like environmental breakdown, and it felt very urgent and immediate, even though the actual gameplay was very goofy and like, but it had this sense of like the structure is just like the opposite of like we're picaresque murder hobos trying to get the dragon's gold. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Which was super
it's nice
refreshing.
to have things that are not the monomyth.
Yeah,
Despite
sure.
what people will tell you about how to write narratives, you don't actually have to write the monomyth again. We've heard it. Don't worry, we're fine.
We're cool with it. Yeah, we're not mad at it. We're cool with it. It's fun, but like, yeah, we've done it. Um, so where is Ashfall at? So in terms of, you said you preparing games for print. People can buy it
Mhm.
through your itch page, so hexavexagon.itch.io. But how are you? Let's talk about sort of a product for a second, because you've had different versions. Do you feel like the design on that is pretty much done, and you want to sort of print and sell a book version and sort of promote that? Do you feel like you're still designing it? I'm curious how your process works in terms of that next stage of development. You've play tested it; it's fun. What do you do with it? You know what I mean?
I'm very happy with the recent changes I've made to Ashfall. I would like to do another playtest of it at some time, but I don't have time or playtesters. But before I actually release that, I would like to make more playbooks for it, because the playbooks are delightful, and you've seen them. They are definitely like visually the most amazing thing I've designed. They look so good, and they're very easy to put together as well. So it would be nice to have more of them. Um, I have made one for slasher horror, so there is now also the option of a slasher horror genre for your games. But there's other stuff that I want to put in there, like cyberpunk, for instance.
So that would be fun. So sort of bringing the genre to the system and to the narrative, ludonarrative tropes, or what am I looking for? Structure. It's hard. It's almost like hard to imagine the cyberpunk version, and that makes me definitely want to play test that. So let me know.
Yeah.
How
I
are
mean,
you
even
printing?
slasher horror with like working with the other genres is hard to imagine. But I imagine like something closer to The Thing than a traditional slasher horror. Something John Carpenter specifically.
Right. For
I
some
think
reason,
that
I can
would work
imagine that
better.
because those do have a sense. I think it feels Ashfall in my head because there's like often a horrible monster, but the actual environment is also a real danger or like a problem. And a lot of those movies, I think, are a critique of kind of especially like waspy, like uptight 80s America, like Thatcher, Reagan era, middle class white culture, as well as like there's literally a zombie's going to kill you. And I feel like Ashfall has that kind of duality or sense of like the environment is one thing, but then you can have this like narrative within it. But
I mean,
Cyberpunk, I'd love to see as well. Yeah.
in Ashfall and obviously in the Life is Strange series, the environmental hazards are like this is the time when people finally started making media about how we're worried about climate change. But in Life is Strange, all of the environmental hazards are like deep metaphors for the emotional turmoil the characters are going through. And they don't even like it's a video game, but they don't state these things. Like it's not a thing where they pour it out as exposition for once. And that's
Well,
really
that's that.
nice.
I mean, that gets to a lot of my interest in RPGs and how do you make RPGs that do some of that thoughtful work without having to tell people or beat them over the head or make it just frankly unfun.
Oh yeah, I
Um,
think about that so much.
Yeah, I was going to ask. So I feel like we've talked a little about this, but maybe this, on the record, like this is the time. Like, okay, to what degree? How do you incorporate, whether it's politics in the vernacular sense of like electoral politics, or just kind of more the politics of whatever, whether it's one's relationship to the environment, gender, um, all these different kinds of, I don't know, like workplace relations or like being a kid. Like I think about even the sort of Scooby Doo trope and like how that solving a mystery as teens is like a really weird, like, I feel like that would, kids would get in a lot of trouble today if they went off with friends in a van trying to solve mysteries. But yeah, like how do you sort of take into account these bigger themes and how do you choose to address them or not address them?
It's also, I think the solving mysteries thing is like a very good cultural metaphor for the way that you feel as a child when you're like, oh, there's problems in the world and the adults aren't solving them. And there's like, you have to go through a whole um terrible like emotional turmoil until you come to terms with that when you're a child. Like it hit me when I was 10 and I remember it. I was like the most depressed I've been in my life because I realized that like people are being socially conditioned to act in a way that's going to make the world worse and I can't do anything about that. Um sorry, I just immediately got way off topic there. Um
No, you're good. I mean, I think that's part of the question of the depth, where you can say games are just fun or there's some sort of depth or philosophy, but I think there's a lot of bleed and things jump around in part because it's not a political manifesto or something, right? They're like these dreamlike spaces and they're interactive and they're group activities. The kids stuff, I've never really thought about it, frankly, until say Blister Critters. It just was like, oh yeah, I just don't make games with kids in mind particularly. Like smart kids will play it. That's
Blister
fine.
Critters is such a very particular take on what politics is to kids, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and it's really from Tony's head, but obviously I've had a real hand in sculpting that and thinking about the environmental piece, especially. But it has that part of that was to the point you raised about like, if you're playing, even if you're playing an adult animal, I think people inhabit a childlike space when you say you're an animal, right? In any of these games, it probably is the same. This is a strong hypothesis I have. If you're playing Wander Home or Mouser or whatever, right? You act more childlike because you're this little guy. Maybe this is a question for
Yeah,
you because you play a little character, a little weasel like Xenofauna in our Stillfleet campaign. Um, but yeah, I do think that is an interesting way to engage with the world, and it raises different questions around all kinds of social relations when you are viewing yourself as little or fragile, or you know what I mean? Like you're taking on just childlike
So
emotions. So
Wonder Home is an interesting thing to bring up on that topic because I have a particular qualm with that game in the way that um, it tells people that they can be animals, right? It's like you can be a cute little animal. And then it's like one of the features of the game is you can be like a bee farmer, I think, or a moth farmer or something like that. And it's like on one hand, the characters you're being are like animals, and there's a certain like degree of giving you the feeling that this is like a safe, non-oppressive sort of scenario and setting. But then they replicate the way humanity is like really horribly oppressive to animals by being like, yeah, some of these bugs are now livestock, and it's like you didn't have to do that.
yeah, that was a big question. We thought about this a lot, and not just. I mean, again, for me, it's always I'm really just a deep book nerd, and I'm thinking about these things from a lens of like literary fiction as well. But Tony and I talked about that with some games, movies, books. You know, do we end up recreating all of the evils of humanity with leaving no space for change, basically? So it's sort of one to one. Like, okay, all the humans are gone, but the animals are just the humans, which is very much the George Orwell take. You know,
Yeah, that one's
or you
weird.
do something else, and I think you can outlaw that. You can say like, okay, we're just not going to show, we're going to mix it up, so there's no groups of animals that are the same animal, and then there's obvious stand-ins, whether it's racialized or just otherwise, you know, social groups of humans that are one-to-one mapped onto the animals. They're always mixed up in the game. And then where there's no sort of slavery, right? There's no sense that these animals are oppressing each other that way. There might be killing because they're animals, but like if they kill you, they're going to kill you because they're this rabid beast. They're going to eat you, whatever. But there's no sense of like human exploitation. You could develop that, but I think it was, you know, it's interesting to think that through. And it was not necessarily the obvious or the first thing. I think actually for me that was more about the environment. Um, but yeah, I mean, this is a little odd. So I think, you know, maybe this is a good segue to talk about Hunting Billionaires for Sport, which is, in my mind, and tell me if I'm wrong, but a game you've made that is inherently about political economics, right? I mean, the title alone gives away the bag
Okay,
there,
I'm going
and
to
that's
tell
another
you
fun
you're
one.
wrong. It's not a
Okay, great,
political game at all.
great, great.
No,
Well, maybe you can
yes.
introduce the game itself and then go, you know, wax poetic about the deeper
Okay,
themes.
let's talk about it. Hunting Billionaires for Sport is a game that does what it says on the box. Um, you become a person who hunts billionaires, and you do that as a sport. And the sport is kind of like an esports thing, so it's a streamed experience. It's set in a world where there is a web app called Nero.tv. And Nero is a streaming service in which people watch hunters hunt billionaires for sport. Um, and the reason that why billionaires can't do anything about the existence of Nero.tv is because it's so popular that all of their investment portfolios got tied up in it. And so no one will do anything about it because they don't want to lose money, which is my favorite detail of the entire setting.
And that's not
Um,
political, right? This is probably just going to
no.
happen, right? You're just taking a political look at the future.
The game is set 1 year after people started hunting billionaires for sport. And every time I update the game, the year in which it's set moves to 1 year after the update that I'm putting out, which is not political. I'm not suggesting anything at all with that. Um, yeah, politics and hunting billionaires for sport is an interesting thing. One thing that I do when I'm putting politics into games is I try to avoid a thing that I call genre conveniences, which is to say anything in a narrative that exists just for the sake of making things, making like the narrative flow easier, but like goes against the logic of the world, I hate that. And a lot of tropes are just those things. And if I can make a like setting, fantasy world, whatever, I will use the tropes that people can easily latch onto, but I won't use the tropes that are genre conveniences. And one thing about the whole idea of killing billionaires, which I want to treat very sincerely, is the fact that if you kill someone, that doesn't change where the power is. Like, the power, billionaires don't have that much power. Like, they have a bunch of money that's tied up in assets. And if you kill that person, those assets go to a different person. Like, it's not a thing that brings about a big political reform or something, you know? And I try to like very much be sincere about things like that in my games and avoid implying that there is an easy solution to a problem in which there is no easy solution. All of the solutions are extremely difficult. Um, so in hunting billionaires for sport, if you kill a billionaire, there is some stuff that's not very touched on in the text at the moment. Originally I'd written some stuff about it, but it's not currently in the game. But when I do an update, I'll probably add more about that. But basically, if you kill someone, then rather than the power shifting in a way that doesn't make sense, the power shifts in a way that does make sense. And part of that is like there's more growing support for narrow TV. There's growing support for all of the collectives that assist you. So another part of the setting is that there's like art and manufacturing and fashion cooperatives and collectives that work to make like the weapons you use and the clothing that you wear, um, and stuff like that. Um, because cooperatives is one of the things that's actually important for us to like take back power. Because a large reason why power goes to where people only want money, want number to go up, is because corporations are like legally required to only think about number go up. Like they have to do stuff that their stakeholders want. And if the people who own the shares are like, you did something good and that didn't make number go up, then they get sued. Like they
Yeah,
literally
yeah.
can't do anything about that.
Well, I
And
think this is
cooperatives
the
are different
tension,
from that.
and we've talked about this with Stillfeet and with other games, where it's the personal or the structural, right? Like if you kill the big bad, the structure goes on. As you said, you kill Shmilan Shmusk, and like all of that money doesn't go to the people, or nothing really changes. It's just like, okay, that one asshole's gone, right? So I think that's an interesting. I think I'd like to hear more about the mechanic and how do you see that possibly playing out. Where is the locus of change, or what could change feel like, um, even if it's not like world revolution, but just like what things do change over time if individual billionaires are dying, the system is still profiting, but does that lead to different ways of being, ways of thinking about money and wealth, if money can get you enrolled in this kind of lottery where you're the target of these kind of Robin Hood influencer types who kill you. um, Also, they don't use guns to kill you. There's no guns, which I think is
Oh
interesting. Kind
yeah.
of reminds me of Dune, like part of the fiction that's taken very seriously and very importantly, but is different than a lot of modern or sci-fi RPGs. So there's so many things that I could talk about this one game all day, but go for it.
Um, a, the guns thing is one of the big influences for hunting billionaires for sport is Ruby, and Ruby is like it's got this whole plot which doesn't matter. It's all about people having these cool weapons that transform. That's the important thing. So I was like, we can't just have guns. We need to have cool weapons that transform. So I have to make up an excuse for guns to not be there. What was the plot point? I think it was something like when the hunts started, billionaires would just like, hey, we need to stop the manufacturing of guns now, and everyone was like, well, the money says so. So, and also not political. But yeah, just
Yeah,
the idea that if the people with money were suddenly like, hey, we should stop guns, and like you could just do that. I think
yeah,
that
like
one's
why
like
not?
actually true.
Yeah, yeah, and I think some of the what ifs. This is one of the things that sci-fi I love, where the what ifs. Your argument is not that these are the best what ifs. You're just like, I'm going to treat them seriously because they're the most interesting to me, and then if I don't treat them seriously, the outcome will be bad. Um, but like they themselves don't have to be things I think are true or real. And this comes up again a lot in the context of work I've done in sci-fi, where people want sci-fi sometimes to be predictions about the future, and you're like, that's not what sci-fi is, like that's not what fiction is. It's not necessarily a one-to-one like, I'm going to tell you how it's going to be. It's more like, I'm going to seriously consider this what if, and that's a certain way to have certain kinds of discussions about the self or society or materiality, the environment. And I think Hunting Billionaires is interesting for a few reasons. The gun thing is relatively minor in the game, because I feel like you get used to it, and people have played D&D, and it's almost just like, we need D&D weapons to go hunt billionaires. It feels actually like a lot of movies I've seen. I feel like Old Boy, like a lot of Korean movies have like
Oh yeah,
street
for
fighting with
sure.
things that
Like
aren't guns.
I don't know what it's called, but there's a movie where a guy is. There's so many movies where it's just like, oh, this is an old guy, and a bunch of people with guns pissed him off, so now he has to do a vengeance to everyone. There's one where a guy, I think he just has a wrench for the whole movie. Um, Also, there's a really funny, I think it's Clive Owen movie, where he kills so many people with carrots.
Carrots. That's
He's
that's
just
great.
fan
That's
because the
wild.
character likes carrots, so he keeps having carrots in various scenes, and there's he's being chased the whole time, so people just keep busting into a scene when he's eating a carrot, so he just kills them with a carrot. It's so
This goes to
stupid.
the ludonarrative like structure thing. I remember my friend Patrick in college was saying we should make this movie where there's just, it's like a guy walking down the street, and then people start, like random normal people on the sidewalk, like of a urban street, start getting up and attacking him, and he doesn't know why, and everyone, it's just an hour and a half chase, and you never learn why. And he was getting away from, like, I was getting really deep into story, and my friend was getting really into kind of directing, and like, it doesn't, who cares what the story's about. So I was like, yeah, whatever. But the more I see this genre, because I know exactly what you mean, I feel like I've seen every version of that movie except the actual carrot one you just brought up. But I love this. There's an old guy, something's gone wrong, and he has to get the vengeance on the mob, whatever, that's all in brackets. Um and yeah, it's just basically a chase. It's like a chase toward a running away from. The plot really doesn't matter, but there is something really interesting about that is also, again, different from the quest. Um and I guess I bring it up really just with Hunting Billionaires. Hunting Billionaires has an interesting narrative shape too, where you're chasing the billionaire through the billionaire's compound, like palace. So it's also kind of a chase story, and it's a very action movie thing without necessarily being all about violence. There is some violence, but it's not like you have to kill everyone else. You just have to kill the one guy at the end. But to get
Yeah,
there, there's
that's one
sort
of
of
my
series
favorite
of traps,
parts,
and
that you
yeah,
just actually don't have to kill other people. Like, there's so many games where it's like, there's a antagonist, and therefore you have to kill all of their goons. And it's
right,
like, no,
right, right.
just kill the one person. That's the problem.
Yeah, and I, like, when we played it the other, like when I ran one where you guys were hunting down a billionaire on a giant mega yacht that was kind of a casino, but also where the guy lived, there was like international waters. There were a lot of just normal rich people and service people there, and security guards, and some like real assholes, and some real interesting characters. And I randomly, I think I asked you guys to name some celebrities, or we kind of were making up this world where like maybe some Hollywood A-listers are visiting, and so it took on the character of like your PCs, the influencers, were also interested in some of the randoms because they made friends sort of while getting intel on the billionaire, or
Yeah,
because it was like a celebrity,
the
or
Indian
just like,
movie star guy was cool.
yeah,
And then we
who
had
kind of sold you
Jared
out.
Leto.
And Jared
I
Leto showed up.
I remember specifically my character. Uh, we got to like a security gate where Jared Leto had high enough security clearance to go through, and I was like, seriously, for Jared? And and you replied, yeah, just because that guy likes Jared Leto that much.
Yeah, and some of that was like, this is just funny, let's go with it, to taking it seriously, like, okay, this A-lister is like actually friends with this billionaire,
There's
and
so
that,
much
because I
of
think
that
you'd
in the
maybe used a
game.
power, or, um
Hunting
but
Billionaires for Sport is also a game that is like way more about world building than you expect it to be. And
yeah.
that's Ryan's fault specifically. I'm going to call out Ryan for that. Because when he ran a playtest for us, one of the things that he would do is so often he would stop and be like, hey, what's something a billionaire would have in this room? And that was the funniest part of the experience. And I was like, this has to be how the game works. We need to
Oh
stop
yeah.
people and be like, what's the funniest thing a super rich person would have in every room?
Yeah, and take on some of the, take seriously some of the gaudiness. So you can always spam, in my mind, again, drawing on action movies and all these, this sort of elegance, in Blade Runner, in that extended world, we see sort of ziggurats and stuff that that the rich people are in. But I think there's a lot to say about how, like, being really rich, how much money can you spend? Like, people, you can't buy good taste. There's all these other kinds of tropes that can be really, really funny. And so it's a dark game. It's this apolitical game about violence, but it's also very funny. And to your point, it's actually about world building, not just combat, or like combat's incidental. I was wondering, so we're coming up on an hour, and I'm wondering, before we leave this subject, can you tell people a little about the actual gameplay? Because again, it's very different. It's not like Ashfall. It's not like D&D. Um, and I encourage people to check it out. And also, I guess, to go, I don't know that I don't know that I have the answer. What is the print readiness of all these games, and where will people be able to get them? Do they need to go to New Zealand, or will they possibly get them some other way? So this, we might have to come back to this in a part two, because I know some of this might be in flux. But yeah, do you want to say a little more about Hunting Billionaires for Sport, to kind of pitch it as a game? Because I think it's a cool mechanic separate from the world.
Um, I don't know if I can do that because the new update is changing the mechanics in
Oh, okay.
some big ways. Um,
I mean, that's fair too.
it's kind of gonna run the same way though. Basically, one person, the session runner, is creating a world. The main thing is they make a map of a very cool place. That's super important. They make a horrible person in a cool place, and that's their preparation time. That's the two important things you need to do. And then you get a group of 3 or 4 hunters together. They are ostensibly incognito. Ostensibly, there's a stream that's live, but on like a 30-minute lag or something, so they can't be stream sniped by billionaires who want to not die. That stuff's a little bit hand wavy, but basically the idea is you set them up against the first obstacle so that everyone can have their sort of test run of how powers work. Um, Powers are just stuff you can do. One thing that I find weird about RPGs is a lot of them are like, here's a power fantasy, but you have inherently not very good odds at like achieving a thing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, I
Yeah.
want hunters specifically to be capable people in this setting. They are the people most capable of doing things. And so
Yeah.
the mechanics reflect that. Um, and you have these pools of attributes, and you spin from them to use skills. Um, which is a great system because it means you don't have to worry about difficulty. You can have a super easy game, you can have a super hard game. It doesn't matter because either way, your hunters are going to be spending their resources. Um, and when you spend too much of a resource, you have consequences, and it's that whole sort of thing. There's also a thing for healing the consequences. This is another thing about genre conveniences that I talked about before. The process of healing a consequence is essentially that you get back the like health slot that you had for this consequence, but instead you get a scar, and it's like it can be emotional or physical or whatever. But if you get too many scars, then your character has to retire because it's just like it's taken too much out of them. If you get too many consequences, then your character dies. So it's got like there's a balance going on, and there's also like this game cannot create an infinitely long campaign, which is nice. It's nice to have like something to say we won't just get lost in this and waste all of our time when we could start a new campaign of something else, you know? Um,
Yeah, yeah, and I really like that, and I think there are other games increasingly that prioritize. It's not just like play until you're level 20, infinitely powerful and rich, or you die. But there's other kinds of narrative off roads, retirement of various kinds, and I think it's something again. I think about specifically with Stillfleet, like building in better sort of what rebranding means, or like leaving the company defecting would really look like, and having. I think Kadita, Ian Dirk joined us in the chat. His book does a good job of showing some aspects of that as well. But I like that Hunting
yeah,
Billionaires. You're addressing trauma, right? You're talking about trauma and the psychic trauma of like killing people for a
I was going
living
to
and
bring
kind
up
of
the
being an
traumas. Yeah,
influencer. Yeah.
the traumas are such a
Um,
good mechanic. Stillfleet is great for that because I feel like every time I finish a any mission of Stillfleet, like one venture, even if it's a short venture, I feel like it's right to retire a character at the end of a venture because it feels like everything that goes on is just too overwhelming. Like if you were to put yourself in that character's shoes, you'd be like, I can't do this anymore. I have to change my lifestyle. And I think that's
yeah.
kind of what you were going for with the premise of working for a horrible company, right?
Yeah, I mean, it really makes me reflect on, the very short historical timeline of the long 20th century, and sort of, I think being um, generous, 300 years or so of industrial modernity is like a blip, right? And most people, most of the time, had very different ways of being. It doesn't mean they didn't travel. It doesn't mean they were stuck or they were all serfs or whatever near, fantasies are in people's heads. Even if life was harder in a lot of ways before industrial modernity, but the ways of being were just very different, and people that weren't locked into they didn't have the habitus of like you have to get a job, you're a worker of a certain type, you work at a company, and you have to kind of just do that. And I was thinking the other day, basically about the Dutch East India Company. Steve and I were looking at the British East India Company, and Steve and I had gone to some and see some of their records live in an archive, and it's wild. I mean, just horrible, evil stuff. But you have to think about, like, to your point, who goes on a boat named basically the Murder Hobo. I mean, all their original ships had crazy names, and they sail somewhere and they like set up a trade deal at gunpoint. And then, by the time so if you imagine leaving England in whatever year that is, Shakespeare's times or a little later, by the time you like do that and come back, like you've killed all these people, you're a horrible person, and like you're totally a different person. And a lot of people just don't come back, I think. I was not there. I wasn't looking to records, but I'm thinking about like what records exist and what they must say. And I think partially, it takes a couple hundred years for the really rich people who aren't doing any of that stuff. They're sending out the workers as industry takes off and capitalism takes off. It takes a while to figure out the means of social control that aren't coercive, where people do put themselves in little boxes. And so I think Stillfleet really came out of that insight into like, let's make a game about you're in this box, you're in the Kafkan box, and you break out. You do the Kafka thing where you go mad, but it doesn't have to be Lovecrafty, and it could be, you retire, you defect, like you could take it wherever you want. But I think the narrative structure was really the driver of the game, and I think that's all to bring it back to your games. Hunting Billionaires for Sport has that similar insight to me as a player and as a GM of it's about the narrative structure. It's you're an influencer who's going to do this apolitical thing, wink, wink, of killing a billionaire, but also that is horrible. Like you are doing something where people are going to try to fight back. Like you have to be famous, but also like a warrior. It's like a weird life decision that like I myself, would not want to do ever. You could not pay me to do that,
Oh
to go
yeah,
fight guys with machete. Like,
that's also something mechanical in the game, because the kill action is the one that is most expensive, and not only is it most expensive, but it requires you to take mental harm, which the other stuff does not require you to do.
yeah. And I think like, yeah, I mean, I think all these stories, like say they're not actual predictions. They're not political messages in the sense of we need to do a certain thing with our lives, but they are fun ways of exploring some what ifs and really getting specific. And for whatever reason, they work over and over again, which I think is the mark to me of a fun RPG. Not to diss anyone's games that are kind of meant to be played one time and move on, but I like things that could be campaigns or could lend themselves to deep characters who, even if you're not playing a 20th level, quote unquote, you could play through a person's life and see how the traumas accrue, or you let go of certain things, or you finally decide, you know what, this is not what I want to do with my life, my fictional life. So I appreciate that while you've definitely made some other games that I take it are not meant to be like big, that these big games, speaking to book length and also experience, do function in that way. So, I mean, Vex, I want to let you go. It's been over an hour, and there's so much more we can talk about. We have to have you back on. Um,
We didn't actually get to talking about the traumas.
oh, sorry. So I was going to say, what else do you like? What do you want to talk about before we go? Let's talk about traumas, and beyond that, are there some other projects, anything you want to plug, anything that people should know besides go to hexavexagon.itch.io, and that we'll have you back on and we'll discuss maybe print updates or other things like that. But definitely let's do traumas. Yes, please.
Yeah, so I guess let's take an overview look at the characters in Hunting Billionaires for Sport, because character creation is fantastic in this game. It doesn't ask you to think about much with your character. In fact, I originally designed it as a 3-step process, so you only have like the very basic stuff for your first game, because you don't need the other stuff. And it is the case with role-playing games a lot of the time that you start out with a character concept, but you don't know where you're going with it. And so this game doesn't ask you to know where you're going, which is great. But part of that is the premise that you're working anonymously, like, really works in favor of doing it this way. So initially you have a hunter who is just like a person with a fancy mask, fancy clothes, a fancy device, which presumably is a weapon that transforms and is super cool. Um, I still remember one of the characters that that was brought to one of our playtest games. The person after the game was sort of apologetic. Sorry, I don't remember who this was, but they were sort of apologetic that their character wasn't like that thought through. Um, their character was a fencer with a grappling hook, and that is a concept that I still think about to this day. So in my brain, it plays it to the tune of the song "Angel in a Centerfold." So my brain keeps going, fencer with a grappling
Fencer,
hook.
grappling hook. It's very anime, right? It's very like,
Yes,
now I
that's what
reveal
we
my
want.
real power, and your real power seems on just on face like not as good as just buying a gun, which I feel about 99% of anime characters. And then it's cool as fuck, of course, it's great. Um,
Yeah, and we had someone with a Kusari Gama that had like a flint blade on it, and the instead of the like meteor hammer end, it had a can of gasoline that we refer to as the Kusari gasoline. That one
that's
also cracks me up.
wonderful.
That's not what I imagine when I think devices that are like cool stuff like the transforming weapons from Ruby. But also like it's very hard to explain that that's what I imagine. So it's nice seeing people interpret the words and be like, what would I do actually?
Right. I mean, for what it's worth, I feel like I've leaned into, I think it's a source of strength now to just not try to know all the references, not play the video games, not watch all the things, and just be like, whatever, I'm going to interpret it through like a weird filter of, um, just philosophy and science fiction and whatever. And it'll just have to be, or science, and it'll be what it is. And hopefully that's been fun enough to play in groups with.
Yeah, I mean, there's a guy who does videos on YouTube of him playing Grand Theft Auto without killing people. And he has a philosophy degree, and it extremely shows. And he's recently made a game, um, which also just like reeks of philosophy degree, and it's fantastic seeing the like cross genre influence happening there. It definitely, it's not like it makes you a good game designer, but it makes you produce things that are new to people in a media landscape where there is so much opportunity to find things that are not new to you.
Yes, there's so much opportunity to reproduce a version of Tolkien-esque, Peeker-esque, murder hoboing with also just no trauma, right? There's no downside. You never sort of have to deal with the consequences of your actions. So any game that has
Yes.
any take on maybe that's not how, that's not an interesting what if, what if I could run around and do whatever I wanted? I mean, that's a power fantasy for a 12-year-old. As you get older, there's other sort of power fantasies,
Thank you for
and
bringing
fishing
it
mini
back to
games.
traumas because I'm really struggling to get to this
No, that's fine. And I
explanation.
will say we're gonna end it there after. So do traumas, and then we'll do a plug, and then we're gonna, I think, call it, if that's okay, Vex, just in
Yep,
terms
yep,
of
yep.
time. Cool,
So
cool.
the traumas are like the end stage of the character development, and they are they're very less mechanical, way more narrative than the other skills and stuff you have. Um, and they're also very influenced by Rachel's book State of Flux. I think I was reading it when I was writing Hunting Billionaires, and I think that might have been what got me the idea to make them this way in the first place. But also, when we did a playtest, Rachel brought the main character from that book as a hunter into our playtest, and I was so thrilled with that. I thought that was absolutely fantastic that I went out of my way to make two particular traumas that reflected the magical realism in the book so that those characters can like effectively be canon in Hunting Billionaires for Sport. Um, but basically, the traumas are you have traumas that are based on like real life trauma that we experience under capitalism. So you have stuff like polyworker, which is the expectation to be in a bunch of places at once, and that sort of all of these things manifest themselves in a very uh, Cthulhu universe, Eldritch horror sort of way. So you have this narrative coming up um, in which you have a trauma. Your character has a trauma that you sometimes pull into the narrative, and sometimes it pulls against you. It's a very much like a contentious relationship you have with it. So you can use it to essentially do magic, but also there will be times when you don't have control over it. There's a healing healing one where you can take the wounds of others, like they move across the person's body and onto yours. It's very gross. But that one came up in the first playtest we had. One of the NPCs I made had that trauma, and also the player, I think the player who ended up having their wound taken from them also had that trauma.
That's I really love that sort of. I associate with like the films of David Cronenberg, so I always say like Cronenbergian body horror.
Mm.
But I think sometimes people hear that and assume it's like a, again, more of a teen, like nightmarish weirdness for weirdness sake thing. But I think there's a deeper element. If you watch like Videodrome, or I actually think the reboot of Dead Ringers was really good, which is less magically real but still very much about bodies and some, without spoiling it, weird science fictional things that happen to bodies. And I think taking those things seriously too is something like a lot. This is also in the chat, thinking about rolling and things that work, don't work, and why, the inheritance of wargaming in RPGs. A lot of RPGs seem to simulate like violence, and focus a lot on that, which can lead to trauma, obviously. But I think there's other ways to explore like having a body and what that could be like. And I think some of the things you've done there with the magical realism is really cool and different.
Yeah,
Um,
you can go the opposite way. You can start at the trauma and be like, how does this
right.
lend itself to violence?
Right. Or like, how does it lend it, or just to experience? So if the end trauma of getting hacked to death by a different Picaro or eaten by Grendel or whatever, that's kind of what you could work backward from in that OSR Dragon game space. But I think what you're doing is looking at, similar to some of the things I've done or some of the other designers we've talked to on the show, what are some of the, what are like hooks into our lived experience and some of the real traumas we've experienced, and how would that be, what are fun ways or safe ways or interesting surreal ways to kind of explore those in a game setting,
Yeah, I
since
tried to
most of
make
us
them
don't fight with swords. Yeah.
uncomfortable and relatable.
Hmm.
Like stuff that
I like
people
that.
would actually recognize. Like there's a climate change one where it, the like weather is actually affected by your mood. So the more stressed out you get by it, like if it starts flooding because of this trauma, it will get worse.
Yeah, it's a feedback loop, which is very
Yeah,
climate
that one
change,
is
right?
like one of the worst ones to have because it is potentially an actual death spiral for your character. Like if you pick that one, beware.
Potentially, ideally. um
Mm.
Well, Vex, I have to run, but I really appreciate your time, and I definitely, I mean it when I say, we should just have you back on, and discuss with Chris, all these themes again. But I think, it'd be interesting to hear some updates, and
Yeah,
yeah, maybe just to tease it, maybe it'll become real if I manifest it. Have versions that people can buy in print, of some of your excellent games, only some of which we just scratched the surface today.
yeah, because
So
I'm across so many different like ways of making games and also so many different political topics in my games. There's still so much to talk about.
which is always the fun. I mean, ideally, games are so much bigger than, like I say. Just, I know it's a straw man argument, but just kind of running around killing things, right? So, although funny enough, yeah, Hunting Ability for Sport very much running and killing things in the game, in the title. So with that, Vex, any last quick thoughts before we let you go, and wish everyone a happy weekend wherever you are?
Yes. So now finally should have mentioned this way earlier, but the Kiwi RPG Week, Kemu Whakatawa Aotearoa, um, it's it should be happening about when this comes out, hopefully. So it's starting on the 23rd of June. Um, and if you go to kiwirpg.com, let me just double check that that is the actual correct website. I believe it is. Um, then you can find out all about all the stuff that's happening locally in my space, with the amazing, frankly, just like astoundingly awesome indie and even non-indie. We've got some big names with us as well. Various designers who will be putting out new work. They'll be putting out. There's a lot of podcasts and shows and actual plays and stuff. We've got bundles going on Itch and Drive Through. Um, I should have made a list of all the stuff I should talk about, but basically there's a lot of stuff going on, and you should visit that website and check out everything that's happening, because it's cool as hell, and it's fantastic, like, for advertising and marketing for various indie designers who actually, like, need support from people. So it's very good for them, and me included, although I don't have anything this year.
We'll post obviously links in socials and whatnot, and so it's kiwirpg.com, right?
Yeah, that is
so
the correct
Hexavexagon, hexavexagon.itch.io. People can get not all of your games, but some of your games, including the ones we talked about today. Some real bangers.
Basically all the good ones.
I mean, who knows? We don't even know what else there is. But yeah, and kiwirpg.com, you can find out more. Certainly, if you're in New Zealand and you don't know Vex, I don't know what's going on, but you know. Vex is awesome.
Yeah, if you're in New Zealand, then you should definitely check it out and join the group on Discord, because they're very welcoming, and like, everyone helps each other so much.
They also have a great website, which is nice. There's a lot of, I'm literally on a different game RPG con website, and a lot of them are like websites from the 90s that have been, brought forward in time for some reason.
Oh yeah, we've got some cons that have extremely old websites as well.
Yeah. Well, Vex, we'll have you back on, and please, we'll try to, just keep the conversation going on Discord. Of course, we try to be active. I need to be more active, but on discord.stillfleet.com. And thanks, of course, to everyone in the chat and anyone listening to this now or in the podcast version, hopefully in a couple weeks. Vex, thank you very much. And, we'll have you back. And this is, why we roll, or in some games you don't even roll, you just use powers. So why we use powers to
spend resources.
That's right. All right, guys, thanks everyone.
Lose our minds.
Uncomfortable but familiar. I'll see you around, Vex. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Why We Roll. Our theme music is by the brilliant Sam Tyndall and Arpline. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
You can find us on Twitch and what used to be Twitter at Why We Roll, and on Instagram at whyweroll.pod.
You can find out more about Dance Macabre at timespaceplace.itch.io/dance-macabre.
You can find out more about Stillfleet at stillfleet.com. Thanks for listening.
Hey there, Hugh from Podderation here, and if you like today's show, why not have a listen to the All Things Nintendo podcast? Hosted by Brian Shea, former director at Game Informer and lifelong games journalist, the show explores the ins and outs of gaming's oldest company and one of its biggest, featuring interviews, featuring reviews, featuring everything you want to know about the world of Nintendo. If you'd like to learn more, check out our website at podderation.com.